with Professor Micahl Alberstein. Professor Alberstein is the Dean of the Faculty of Law at Bar-Ilan University and is academically responsible for the Clinic of Dispute Resolution at the Law Faculty. She has published numerous books and articles on ADR in general and mediation in particular, and has taught ADR in leading universities around the world. So Micahl, as the academic, you're the professor here. While following the signing of the Abraham Accords, there may be economic disputes, I would like you actually to focus on what is your insight on overcoming cultural differences.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here. And it's such a pleasure, and actually for me as a conflict resolution person, a mediator, this is a dream coming true. I mean, speaking about peace was always too pretentious, was something that is always something you speak on the first class, but then you speak about domestic mediation, and you speak about ADR, and you speak about courts and settlements, and thinking about the Abraham Accords and the potential they bring, and the new terrain they open. I think this is a new imaginary for me as an ADR scholar and as a mediator. So before speaking about culture and intercultural exchange, I think it's important to speak about arbitration and mediation as kind of a culture of itself, a culture of conflict resolution. This conference is a lot about arbitration, but arbitration is part of a terrain of procedures, part of them negotiation, mediation, ADR at large. And negotiation is the larger context. So we are dealing here with people interacting with one another, negotiating. When it doesn't work, they may go to mediation and then to arbitration. In between, they negotiate all the time. And even today, when people go to court, they keep negotiating and litigation in the shadow of litigation. So I think understanding the language of conflict resolution is first important also to understand what happens in arbitration and also in the other procedures that many times accompany business and any kind of negotiation. So I would start with outlining a few principles that I think repeat themselves that are relevant for any dispute according to the big and dispute that now troubles us all in Israel. And then I will speak about the element of culture and how it comes in. But first of all, what happens to us when we start to speak this language of conflict resolution, when we engage and share this culture? So first principle I think we all embed is to speak about the process and to start to speak what is the right way and the productive way to negotiate. So when Fisher and Uri, the originator of the book, started their book, they started with this second order negotiation, to negotiate about how we negotiate. And if we think about each dispute we have today, part of the question when we come to the table, how would we like to talk? Let's set down the rules. Let's make sure before we enter the conversation that we know how it ends and not just make it break down or go, to escalation. So, and this is a process that I think arbitration is very good at, but in many ways, arbitration is in agreement about how to decide, and it's the law of the contracts between the parties. So there is a lot of choice, there is a lot of regulation, but within it, a lot of creativity. I think arbitration is a very creative process. In terms of the orientation, I think it's very important to notice that conflict resolution people are very optimistic, are constructive, are looking forward, are always trying to start from this point and then look very optimistically and into the future while trying to build something new. Not only by being naive, but also by believing that sometimes you can generate more options, you can think about new solutions, you can merge, you can create things that you couldn't think about if you would think only about the past. So you make the dispute about the past as a business building on the future. So it may happen even sometimes in arbitration. But though I'm a believer in mediation, I must say, so I would say that you can always try to integrate mediation into arbitration. Really? 3 minutes? Wow. So I say 3 more principles and then culture. So relationship. In any dispute, it's very important to know that in the middle, we are dealing with relationship and we are not separate. In the biggest conflicts, in the smallest conflicts, something in between us is created. Today we can do, we know that by brain science, and we know that by many other research findings and by our own intuition, that working on relationship is something that can surprise us and can change the context of the dispute. And we can break the disputes into small parts. We can address the complexity of it. We could speak about the agenda. We can speak bottom up and listen to the parties. These are all measures of dispute resolution. Now, when we reach the place of intercultural negotiation, one of the questions we ask ourselves is, what exactly should we learn? This is not about how you present your business card or what you eat, although this is also important. I think some of the people here emphasized the familiarity they feel in Israel and the cultural, very deep sense of being in Israel or being in the Emirates or being in Morocco. This is something that we want to experience. But when we address another culture in a mediation, I think from my perspective, we have to have kind of a double gesture. One of them is to learn the other culture, is to learn how they negotiate, is to understand their habits. If it's possible, let's live there for a while. Let's be there. Let's embed and feel what other people feel like. On the other hand, we have to be careful of stereotyping, or even pretending. We have to be to be very modest and to know that we can never really know the other's culture. And the other thing about the other is always some kind of multiple identity person with this culture, and he studied law, and he studied business, and he has been in London, he has been in Israel, he has been in many places. So when we address the other side, I think the other gesture is just not stereotyping, not presuming that we really know that the difference will be related to some kind of cultural element. So in the face-to-face encounter, in the place in which we see another person, in which we know that we don't necessarily speak the same language deeply, that we don't come with the same values, that we have maybe different perspective of even of how to communicate, high context, low context, risk aversion, many elements that differentiate between our cultures. I think we can still believe in this face-to-face exchange in which people can surprise us, in which we resist the cultural idea, the idea of civilization struggle, and the idea of differences. And I think this is the beauty of conflict resolution at all. This is something that many times happens in mediation, and I hope this happens also when we do business in arbitration. And I believe that part of really the hope of this endeavor and this whole change in which we speak together about arbitration is that we learn from the bottom up how to interact with each other, how to listen to each other, and how to really create a unique culture of our conflict resolution that for itself can create waves and influence all over the world, hopefully between us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Micahl. So we've had a law professor, now we have attorneys. We're going to stick to the time. We're going to be, advocate, we know how to stick to the time. So Advocate Eytan Epstein from Firon law firm. Eytan is a partner and the head of the international department at Firon law office. Says he's included in the list of the top 100 lawyers in the world in antitrust law, published every year by Global Competition Review. Eytan is a member of the Foreign Trade Committee of the Israeli Chamber of Commerce and is also a member of the IBA. So Eytan, a little bird told me that you were involved in the UAE long before the Abraham Accords were signed, and that you know some of the leading attorneys in the largest law firms in Dubai. Could you just share with us, if you can, of course, some insights from your experience there?
Thank you. Thank you, Menashe, for inviting us, and thank you all for coming, justices, your honors. I've been very interested in the concept of some kind of peace agreement or economical agreement since I worked for the Commission back in the 80s, end of the 80s. And the first time I introduced the concept was at the end of the 90s, where the European Economical Community at that time, what turned to be the EU, had a conference, invited me to speak in a conference in Cairo about possible future of this area. And I came up and introduced the concept which I called MECA, saying Middle East Economic Agreement. That was the vision. I went on to send this and explain to Shimon Peres at the time, but that didn't work. The first time I was in Dubai was in 2011. And my visit, formal visit with an Israeli passport, leading a 3-lawyer delegation from the Israeli bar, came through the auspices of the International Bar Association, and I represent Israel at the IBA, and the collaboration and cooperation of a very close friend of mine, Essam Al-Tamimi, which is head of the Al-Tamimi Law Office, which I believe is the biggest one, not only in Dubai, but throughout the Emirates and other Arab nations. We've been personal friends for many, many years. And I'll tell you an anecdote. In Morocco, by the way, not to neglect, my first visit was 30 years ago. I thought, and we had a conversation about this, one of the best trips I've ever had. And I'm happy to say that as of 2022, last year, our office has a branch in Casablanca. And we've been very busy and with activity. In 2011, I arrived, I was greeted by the Minister of Justice, and those who were at the IBA conference at the time remembered that I was guarded like I was the President of the US, with the black Suburbans and security, and just my name, not the name Israel on it, but that was to secure me. And in the first evening there was a dinner right below the Burj Khalifa in a nice restaurant, and I'm standing in the garden before entering into dinner with my bodyguard, who at the end of the visit, I realized that he was speaking Hebrew fluently, of course. And I'm smoking a cigarette. And he says, he looks at me, he says, "Do you know that this lake is sweet water?" And I said, "You have to be kidding. We're in the middle of the desert. It's 52 degrees outside. Sweet water doesn't..." He said, "Why don't you try?" So I walked a few steps to the lake, put my finger, tasted it. It was sweet water. And I looked at him and I said, "How come sweet water?" He said, "What do you mean? This is Israeli technology." In 2011, and it was already there. And in the Rose Garden, right on the route of the restaurant, he showed me the netafim, the drip water technology, and it was already there. So we've had relationships, business relationships, and some political understanding, but mainly business cooperation many years before the Abraham Accords were signed. There's no question. that the Abraham agreements have had a tremendous impact on Israel's economy. The numbers are simple. Since 2021, we have over $1.5 billion coming into Israel for goods and services sold to the UAE. And the studies show that if Israel has a free trade agreement with each of the countries that entered the Abraham Accords, within a decade, we will have additional $46 billion, 2.3% increase in GDP, 20,000 additional new jobs in Israel, and a reduction of 0.5% in the unemployment rate. So the effect, of course, is tremendous. From Israel's side, the peace with and the agreements with the UAE mean for us a lot. We're becoming an important part in the vision of the UAE and the ruler. They plan 50 years ahead. I hope I can say one day this about Israel. You know, we're a wonderful country. The high-tech and startup nation, etc. But in personality, we are a little bit too quick and too nervous for the dialogue, especially with UAE. People, I found out that they're very well educated and have patience. They take their time and they're patient to study how things can be arranged properly. In the years that have passed, I've been involved. I'll just run down a few areas in which, at least from my personal experience, we've been dealing with. Travel and tourist areas, a lot of technology coming out of Israel. Energy, the UAE's 50 years vision lies on an assumption that there will not be oil in 50 years, and we have to reduce. The UAE is required to reduce dependency on oil. Water, recycling, desalination, I've told you already. The food crisis. Technologies for alternative protein for meat products, for example. Medicine and digital health. A lot of joint ventures in R&D and services. Artificial intelligence. We have an ongoing operation of Israeli developed artificial intelligence in Arab language to assist the UAE government in providing better services to their citizens, for example, in the payment. So, and one which I'm very proud of is the initiatives to develop educational tools for spreading pro-peace values to children, both in all of the countries, of tolerance, freedom of religion, coexistence, etc. So last two comments of caution, and I apologize for being optimistic, but then stepping a bit down. I think we're in very fragile times, and the true meaning and relation between Israel and the other parties to the Abraham Accords will be tested. And I really pray and hope that we will be able to overcome the tensions that come out of the election and that come out of the security incidents that are mounting up, especially going into Ramadan. I hope we will be able to overcome these and continue and maybe soon get Saudi Arabia into the network. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eytan, and we'll move to Giora Erdinast. Giora is a founding partner of Erdinast Benatan Toledano. He is one of the leading and most respected litigators in Israel. He also sits as an arbitrator. He's the mind, I think, behind some of most significant precedents in contract and commercial law. And let me ask you, Giora, how do you see the ADR opportunities in the MENA region following by the Abraham Accords?
Well, I once was taught that a speaker has to speak loud to be heard and be short to be appreciated. And under these circumstances where we are so much late, I will abide by these two rules.
Excellent.
First, we are very excited about these accords, and I can personally attest that our offices was and is involved in negotiations regarding very substantial transactions, and we see a lot of goodwill and enthusiasm on the other side. I can say from my personal experience that it hasn't been the same after the peace agreements with Jordan. I've been there with some clients who were very distinguished Israeli businessmen, and we haven't found the spirit that we came with on the other side. They were very cautious. They didn't really want to have connections with Israel. This is not the case now, and it's a blessing. There have been already a few agreements, substantial agreements that have been signed, and I predict that we will see this trend continues. And where there are agreements, there naturally would be disputes in the future. And since both parties are very cautious about trusting the judicial system of the other country, then the alternative is, of course, arbitration. And I think that my advice would be to look for international arbitrators, I mean international nationalities, not Israelis or guys from the Emirates, but rather international arbitrators, definitely as heads of the panels, but also as side arbitrators, because I think this will create a lot of confidence in the process. We have here excellent infrastructure, no doubt about that. I think that the courts in Israel are excellent. I think that we have here a lot of experienced and professional arbitrators. I think that the courts in Israel have a tradition of respecting arbitration awards, of enforcing them, of very little intervention. So all the good values of arbitration process are there. It will take time. I think it's a dream to try and convince a company from South America dealing with a company in Europe to choose Israel as a seat, but maybe it will happen with time. One caution, and I want to talk about the elephant in the room. The Israeli judiciary system, in my view, and I'm not alone in that respect, is under a brutal attack by the existing coalition. And we are sitting here in the comfort of this room while my heart is with the protesters, and not only my heart, I will be there as soon as this session is over. And I think we all should do whatever we can to preserve our democracy, to preserve our judiciary. Israel is a miracle. It has been built during its 75 years of existence in a way that no other nation has done. So I think we should preserve it. If we want to have human rights, if we want to have business flourishing, if we want to have Israel a respected nation among other nations, we should preserve our democracy, and as much as anybody in this room can help, it would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these very important words, and I'll have to add that if we want to have a good arbitration system going on in Israel, we do need to have proper courts, and with proper courts, we will, we need that courts will not be politicized, but rather professional courts. Moving on to another leading and respected litigators, Dr. Israel Reli Leshem of MEITAR law firm. He is, again, also, they sit together, they compete, they litigate against each other, but they're good friends. One of the leading and respected litigators and arbitrators in Israel. He's the head of the largest litigation department in Israel and considered as one of the leading experts in the field of civil procedure and commercial arbitration in Israel. He was a member of the advisory committee for civil procedure. We have already almost 5 years ago, 5 years ago, changed our civil procedure regulations, and Dr. Leshem was one of the members. I think the change was excellent. So, Reli, how do you solve a classic problem in international arbitration where each party insists that the arbitration will be conducted in his home country?
Thank you for inviting me, and I share completely my friend's call for whoever is in charge of running this crazy train of harming our democracy to stop and see the achievements that we have already made here and not ruin it. So, Giora, I really hope that our small contribution to the protests will eventually help. Yeah. The title of this panel is ADR Opportunities, and let me tell you something about lawyers. Lawyers are experts in identifying opportunities, and then they give you a great speech why each of the options and opportunities that they have identified will not work and should not be followed. But I think in this case, really, there are obviously great opportunities. And I will be very short again because we are running out of time. Number one, I think that our experience with international arbitration in Israel involves mainly transactions to which Israeli companies are making with foreign companies, and in Israel, American companies would normally be the vast majority of the foreign companies doing business in Israel. Usually, when we make a deal with an American company, let's say sitting in Chicago, they will say, you know, for the arbitration purposes, if they agree to it, let's find a neutral forum halfway. Let's agree to go to New York. That's the American usually approach, namely that it's very difficult to convince Americans to agree to anything outside the United States. It's, I think, part of their patronizing attitude towards the rest of us. I think here the case is different. We can't meet halfway. There is nothing halfway between us and the Emirates. So I guess the natural choice of either an Israeli forum or a forum in the Emirates appears to be the reasonable way to proceed. Now comes the really big question. When an Israeli company does completes a transaction with an Emirates company, for example, then comes the question whether, of course, there will be arbitration or not. Let's say they agree on arbitration. Then the question is where. Obviously, each of the participants believes that their legal system and their list of arbitrators, etc., is of course superior to the other, which is of course wrong. Then there is a tactics that we have used in the past and seems to be working because it really means that each party respects the other, and also it, in a way, it lowers the chance for litigation. And that is that the parties agree that whenever there is a dispute arises that requires them to go to litigation, to arbitration, each party will go to the other party's forum. If they, for example, if the Israeli company wishes to sue their Emirates counterpart, the arbitration will take place at the Emirates. If vice versa, the Emirate company wants to sue the Israeli company, they will have to come to Israel. This is a balanced system that really allows both parties to feel that neither party tried really to twist the hand of the other. Now there is the one problem of the counterclaim, you know. The Israeli company decides to go to the Emirates with a $2 million claim, and then the Emirate company hits back with a $20 million claim, but the case is already in the Emirates. We have seen in some cases some, I would say, improvement to the model, and that is that if there is a counterclaim that is bigger than the original claim, then they switch back to the other forum. We have found that to work very well. Really makes the parties think twice before they run to go to arbitration, and we have found that as a solution. As a side thing, I would like to say that I think that, in my mind, arbitration is the natural manner in which to resolve disputes between companies in this region. We have cultural differences. I think that an Israeli company may, without justification, but they might be concerned about going to for a legal forum in the Emirates and vice versa. But I think arbitration is the solution, because in arbitration we can always have a 3 arbitrators panel in which both lawyers or experts from both countries will be present, and they will be able to communicate to the chairman of the panel the different cultural approaches of the parties, which sometimes have a big effect on the contract and a big effect on the way in which they behave. Also, for example, on witnesses, because when you hear a witness, you have to understand the cultural background of the country, of the place from which this witness comes. So I think that arbitration is really the right way to handle disputes between companies in these countries, and we really hope that this will be the mode of operation for the business, for the future business development between companies in these 2 countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Advocate Daniel Reisner of Herzog Fox Niemann. Daniel served as the head of the International Law Department at the Israeli Defense Forces. He was a member of the negotiating team on behalf of the Israeli government in the negotiations on the peace treaties with Jordan and the Palestinian Authority, and had worked under 6 prime ministers. He is now the head of the International Department and Homeland Security at Herzog. And Daniel, I'm going to ask you, what is your recommendation regarding the drafting of dispute resolution clauses in agreements between Emirati and Israeli parties?
Thank you, Daphna. May I start, because I know I'm the final speaker and we're way over time. Arbitration Week reminds me of one of the greatest things that Judaism gave to the world. It's the Shiva. Because after someone dies, we spend an entire week with our families, talking about them, telling the stories, etc. And one of the great results of the Shiva is after a week you're fed up of telling these stories and talking about it, and you want to go back to quasi-normal life. And I think Arbitration Week in this respect is quite similar. And at the end of this week, we won't want to talk about arbitration for long. Yeah. Now, to your question, Daphna, let me start by saying that, as my colleagues know, I am not a litigator by character, because I hate courts. And I hate courts because I don't like giving the results to a third party to decide for me what will happen, which is one of my areas of expertise is negotiations. In other words, for me, if a case goes to arbitration or court, I failed already in resolving the dispute by using a much more, let's say, a controlled mechanism. That being said, we find that if you have to go to a confrontational dispute resolution mechanism, arbitration beats courts 99% of the time. A, because you can guarantee the quality of the judge. B, in arbitration, the judges, the arbitrators, are repeat customers as well, and as a result, you don't get the crazy results you may get in some courts. Not usually, but it can happen. And three, usually there is more time to actually explain complicated issues in arbitration than you would have, especially if you look at the Israeli court system where the judges are, as you explained earlier, totally impossible to meet the workload. That being said, many lawyers, again, not the people on this stage, but many lawyers do not understand the importance of negotiating the dispute resolution clause of the contract. And we get to that usually at the last night of the agreement, after everyone's tired. The client is no longer interested because the business side is over. And this is just for the lawyers to finish. And there's almost no energy left to discuss these issues. And yet, usually, this is one of the most important issues in a contract. And we use that negotiation to do one of three things. A, if we really want to help resolve disputes, we write a dispute resolution clause which is effective and which will really work. And really, your idea, it's one of the good ideas of creating a mechanism whereby if we have to go into a process, at least we'll do something which has a good chance of resolving the process effectively. But it also has another role, which is actually demotivating the parties to go to arbitration. So we actually like writing clauses which make the parties' life difficult if they actually go that route, so that maybe we can resolve the dispute by using alternative means. And of course, being lawyers and being representatives of companies, we use these clauses as leverage. So for example, if I'm representing the stronger power in the negotiation, I will of course draft the clause in a way which will be the most expensive and time-consuming arbitration, because I can afford it and I have the time and money to do that. And I will often win the case just because I wrote it that way. So if I take everything I just said and I put it in the context of the newly developed trade relationship between us and the UAE, and Eytan, just for knowledge, my first trip to the UAE was in 2007, but it wasn't with an Israeli passport. I couldn't tell anyone my name, and I was instructed that if anyone stops me on the street, I have to give them a phone number which belongs to one of the leadership, and they'll fix it. But I specialize in the defense and high-tech world, so my dealings are usually off the books. And in that respect, one of the things we encountered is how do we resolve disputes, especially in the period where we officially didn't have relationships. So of course you understand that at that time, and by the way, if you look at Saudi Arabia today, we're doing exactly the same thing today with Saudi Arabia. We set up companies abroad, we make agreements between foreign companies, and of course we will put in dispute resolution mechanisms of the standard form. But if we go to a normal business dealing today between a big Israeli company and a big Emirati company, what would be my recommendation? First of all, we need to develop mechanisms of trust, because we haven't done business with one another very often, and we don't know one another very well. So the default for people like me is always to go to some mechanism which has an institutional level of trust automatically. So in the big cases, we always go ICC, LCIA, etc., just because it makes our life easier. However, the more trade we do between Israel and the Gulf, for me, the better it will be if we can bring the disputes physically home. Instead of going to London or to Paris, or definitely not to New York, because we are neighbors, we should have the disputes here. Now, Judge Shamlan said when we talked that the DRC courts would be happy to host any of these under almost any format. Absolutely. And Reli made the correct point. Let's motivate people to go to the other side when they want to initiate. Great idea. But for me, and this is a real opportunity for Israel, and Menashe, we've been talking about this. If we can differentiate Israel in certain areas where we have, because we don't have a commercial hub or financial hub like Dubai does, but we have our own unique specialties the defense world, the cyber world, etc. If we can identify the areas in which we have something special to offer, in addition to the great weather, because everyone likes coming here, then we can create a reality whereby the normal day-to-day disputes, the parties will agree to have the seat, not only the venue, in the region. For me, this will be a sign of maturity in the relations between the different countries, but we're not there yet.
Thank you very much, Daniel.